I'm Linda Barrett, 56. My own sister left me to raise her 4 kids for an entire decade. Then she accused me of kidnapping them just so she could steal our family home. If you were in my shoes at 56, what would you do next? There are moments in life when you know deep in your bones that everything is about to change, even if nobody else in the room seems to notice. That was exactly how I felt the morning I sat outside the Franklin County Courthouse clutching a faded manila envelope to my chest. Columbus, Ohio was just waking up. Sunlight spilled across Maple Grove Avenue, glinting off the courthouse windows, but all I could think about was what waited inside that envelope and who would walk away from this courtroom with the right to call 4 incredible kids family. Heather, my younger sister, sat 2 rows away, her lawyer by her side, whispering into her ear as if he could coach her on how to win back a decade she'd willingly given up. Her hands were perfectly manicured, her hair swept back as if for a job interview. She would not look at me. She hadn't not once since this entire circus began. Behind me, I could hear the rustle of papers and the nervous shifting of feet. My 4 nieces and nephews, well, they were more than that now, sat close together. Caleb, tall and quiet at 18, stared at the floor. Sophie and Josie, 16 and 14, shared a look only sisters can give, while Eli, my baby, just 12, tried to shrink into his chair, hoping not to be noticed. They'd all dressed up as best as we could manage, hand-me-down jackets, pressed shirts, polished shoes that pinched at the toes. They'd earned those clothes by helping with extra chores, by watching each other, by growing up a little faster than most. I glanced at Marcia Reynolds, my oldest friend, who squeezed my hand without a word. Her presence grounded me, the one steady thing, when everything else felt like it might slip away. The judge hadn't arrived yet, so the courtroom crackled with anticipation. I traced my thumb along the corner of the envelope. Inside, I had collected everything the letter Heather left behind the day she disappeared. The birth certificates, school forms, hospital bills, faded birthday cards with clumsy handwriting, grocery receipts, snapshots of science fairs and baseball games, and scraped knees. Evidence, yes, but more than that, proof of a life built together. Proof that love is what you show up for day after day, not what you write on a legal form. Heather's lawyer cleared his throat. "Miss Barrett," he called his voice, echoing off the polished wood. "Are you prepared to turn over those children to their mother, as the law requires?" I heard a tiny gasp from Eli behind me. My hands tightened around the envelope. I looked at the judge's bench, still empty, then back at Heather. She finally met my eyes. For a second, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen in years, doubt or maybe guilt, but it vanished just as quickly as it came. My thoughts churned back through every sacrifice, every overnight shift at Riverside Community Hospital, every late-night trip to the Second Chance resale on High Street for shoes and backpacks, every moment I'd stood in the rain outside, the school holding a paper umbrella and a spare jacket, the bills piled up, of course, grocery money, winter coats, birthday cakes that cost $35 when I barely had 20. Every penny was spent on the kids, and not a single cent had come from Heather after she left. I had kept every single scrap of paper, every faded receipt, every attendance record, every doctor's note. Some would call it obsessive. I called it survival. Today, it might be the only thing standing between our family and a piece of paper that said I had never mattered at all. The judge entered. Everyone rose. My knees shook as I got to my feet, but I kept my head high. I reminded myself that I had been there for these kids when nobody else would, when their own mother turned her back, when the world decided a middle-aged nurse was too ordinary to matter. As we sat again, the judge scanned the courtroom, his gaze settling on me. "Miss Barrett, are you ready to proceed?" I swallowed, feeling the rough edges of that envelope bite into my palm. Behind me, Caleb's hand brushed my shoulder, a silent show of support I hadn't expected but needed. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady. I placed the envelope on the table before me, right where everyone could see. For a split second, the whole room felt like it was holding its breath. They don't know what I have in here. I thought, pressing my palm flat against the battered paper, but they're about to find out. Columbus, Ohio, spring of 2014. I was 46 that year, still working steady shifts at Riverside Community Hospital, proud to have finally paid off the last of the home loan on Maple Grove Avenue. My days followed a careful rhythm, early mornings and scrubs afternoons spent tending a small garden, out back evenings with a good book and the promise of quiet. That was before Heather arrived at my door, 4 kids in tow and panic burning in her eyes. I still remember the way the wind rattled the branches above the porch, how a fine mist clung to everything as if the world itself wasn't quite sure what was coming next. Heather's minivan sputtered up to the curb, tires crunching against the gravel. She got out, hair, wild hands trembling, and motioned to the back seat. "Just for an hour, Lynn," she said, shoving a worn diaper bag and a half-empty grocery sack into my arms. "Something's come up. I'll be right back. Please just keep them busy. I'll be quick." Caleb, 8, and Solemn held tightly to Sophie's hand. Sophie was 6, all skinny elbows and quiet defiance, trying to look brave for her younger siblings. Josie, 4, clung to a faded stuffed rabbit. Eli, barely 2, whimpered as Heather hastily buckled him into my old kitchen chair, handing over a sippy cup and little else. I hesitated. My mind raced through all the chores I'd planned for that Saturday, all the reasons I should say no. But family is family, and Heather had always been the golden child, the one my parents worried over, the one they believed would go far if only she had a bit more luck. I told myself it would be fine, just another favor. "Go on, Heather. Take care of what you need to do," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "The kids and I will be fine for an hour." Heather's face softened for a second. She kissed each child quickly, gave me a weak smile, and was gone before I could say another word. The minivan's taillights disappeared into the gray drizzle. The kids shuffled into the house. I set about making grilled cheese sandwiches, nothing fancy, just enough to fill their stomachs. Caleb watched me with guarded eyes. Sophie asked if she could help set the table. Josie pressed her nose against the window, waiting for her mom to pull back into the driveway. Eli fussed until I picked him up and settled him on my hip. As the hours ticked by, my worry bloomed. The clock on the kitchen wall chimed noon, then 1, then 2. I called Heather's phone, no answer. I texted, emailed, even messaged her on Facebook, silence. By late afternoon, Josie's tears came in hiccups. Caleb tried to distract her by reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. Sophie asked if I thought their mom was lost. I did my best to comfort them, hiding my growing fear behind stories and gentle hands. It wasn't until bedtime, while I was sorting through the diaper bag for pajamas, that I found the note. Scrawled on the back of a grocery receipt in Heather's rushed handwriting, "I'll be back soon. Thanks, Linda." The words hit me like a stone in the chest. I pressed the note to my lips, uncertain whether to laugh, cry, or scream. There was no date, no explanation, nothing but hope and a lingering sense of betrayal. That night, I tucked each child into bed, singing old lullabies and promising that everything would be okay. In the quiet afterward, I paced the hallway, dialing Heather's number again and again, each ring unanswered. It dawned on me in that silence that this wasn't just an hour or a day or even a week. My life, our lives, had just shifted on their axis, and I had no idea if or when Heather would ever come home. So I sat at the kitchen table, the kids' soft breathing echoing down the hallway, and stared at the note in my hand. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, I whispered to myself, "We'll figure it out. I have to." Columbus, Ohio, late spring of 2014. The world outside was blossoming, but inside our house life was anything but easy. Those first weeks after Heather left, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over an open canyon, never sure if the next step would hold. Every morning began before sunrise. I'd coax Eli awake with a bottle and a song, pack sandwiches for the older kids, and search through drawers for any clean clothes that still fit. My savings shrank faster than I could count. The cost of groceries, extra laundry detergent, new sneakers for Caleb's growing feet, all of it added up. Every trip to the store was a lesson in stretching each dollar until it nearly snapped. I tried to keep things normal for the children. Caleb and Sophie had to start at the local elementary school, which meant a trip to the district office, paperwork in hand, praying the staff wouldn't ask too many questions. Josie tagged along, clinging to my hand, wide-eyed and silent. Eli spent his days nestled against my chest in an old sling soft hair, smelling of baby powder and hope. When they asked where their mother was, I told them she was sorting things out, that she loved them, that she'd be back soon. I repeated the lie so many times, it nearly started to sound true even to me. Money was tight. I spoke with Marcia, my rock, late into the evenings. She urged me to apply for every kind of assistance available, from free school lunches to low-income childcare. I swallowed my pride and filled out the forms, providing pay stubs from Riverside Community Hospital, old tax returns, utility bills that made my stomach twist. I kept every receipt, every approval letter, every rejection notice, tucking them into a battered accordion folder I stored atop the refrigerator. Most nights, exhaustion wrapped around me like a blanket. I'd set out dinner, macaroni and cheese or tuna casserole, then try to keep up with homework help, laundry baths, and bedtime stories. The kids settled into new routines. Caleb asked about Heather less and less. Sophie started looking for my approval, her eyes searching my face at every small success. Josie drew pictures of all of us, always including me in the center, arms stretched wide. Eli, my baby, learned to call me Mama before he ever said Auntie. Every birthday felt like a small mountain. Caleb's first one without Heather, I scraped together enough for a homemade cake, some balloons, and a used Lego set from Second Chance Resale on High Street. He didn't complain. None of them ever did. The hardest part wasn't the work or the bills, it was the fear. Fear that Heather would show up angry and demand them back. Fear that someone would question my right to keep these kids. Fear that I would never be enough for all of them at once. One evening after the younger three had finally drifted off, Caleb lingered in the kitchen. "Do you think Mom's ever coming back?" he asked, voice, quiet eyes, too old for his age. I hesitated. "I don't know, honey, but we're gonna be okay. I promise you that." He nodded and wrapped his arms around my waist, holding on tighter than I deserved. That night, after everyone was asleep, I stood at the kitchen window watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. No minivan, no headlights. Just the soft sounds of the children breathing the scent of vanilla cake and a pile of dishes in the sink. I realized then that nobody else was coming for us. If we were going to make it, we'd have to sink or swim together. Columbus, Ohio stretched into the autumn of 2014 and the years after. Days melted into weeks, weeks into months, each marked by the kind of repetition that makes change almost invisible until you wake up one day and realize nothing is the same. The first time the school called me Mom, I nearly corrected them. I hesitated, hand frozen over the sign-out sheet at Maple Grove Elementary. Sophie was sick. She'd thrown up after lunch, and I'd left work early, badge still clipped to my hospital scrubs, shoes squeaking as I hurried down the shiny corridor. The nurse asked, "Is Mom here for Sophie?" I nodded, voice caught in my throat. Sophie, pale and teary, leaned into my side. As we walked home, her hand in mine, she whispered, "Do you think Mommy remembers my birthday?" I squeezed her fingers and said, "Of course she does, sweetheart." She seemed satisfied, but I could hear the ache beneath her question, the hollow hope that had started to define all 4 children. Birthdays became our way of pretending everything was normal. I would save up, skip my own haircut, bring leftovers for lunch at the hospital just to afford a small cake from the local bakery balloons from the dollar store and a gift from the resale shop. Josie's 5th birthday was the first she spent entirely in my care. She insisted on a chocolate cake with rainbow sprinkles. I snapped a photo, Josie beaming frosting on her chin, Caleb and Sophie singing as Eli banged a spoon on the table. No one asked if Heather would call. No one mentioned her name. It was easier in some ways to drift through routines. Mornings were a rush, shoes and coats, forgotten lunchboxes, missing homework. Afternoons at the playground, Eli clambering up the slide, Josie swinging as high as I would let her. Evenings meant dinner baths and the small comforts of a bedtime story, the older kids reading to the younger ones when my voice gave out. Sometimes I would find Caleb staring out the window, face pressed to the glass, as if waiting for a familiar minivan to round the corner. I never said anything. I just stood beside him, silent, until he turned away. Money was always tight. I clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, learned to cook with whatever was on sale. We wore secondhand clothes, hand-me-downs from Marcia's kids' bags, dropped off anonymously by neighbors. At first, the kids protested. Caleb pouted over a jacket with someone else's initials stitched inside. Sophie worried the other girls would notice her shoes were a little too big. I taught them how to patch holes to wear socks under everything in winter. Little by little, they stopped complaining. We became a team out of necessity, out of love. Paperwork never seemed to end. Every school year brought a new round of forms, emergency contacts, proof of residency, medical records. The staff at Maple Grove Elementary knew my face, but not always my role. "Are you the legal guardian?" I would answer. "I'm their aunt." A pause. Any chance their mother will be coming back soon, I learned to shrug. "She's working on some things." They never pushed further. Marcia helped as much as she could. She picked up the kids when my shifts ran late, brought over crock pots of stew and once a battered upright piano. Sophie took to it instantly, plinking out Twinkle Twinkle with one finger. Marcia also pressed me gently but persistently to pursue legal guardianship, but every call to the county office led to a dead end. No proof of abandonment, no signed consent, no case, the clerk would say. All I could do was document, document, document. I kept a folder for each child immunization, records, school awards, every tiny scrap that proved my care. The kids asked about Heather less and less. Eli called me Mom without hesitation. Josie drew pictures of our family, always 5 figures, sometimes 6, but the 6th faded with each passing month. I never told them the truth, not fully. I said their mother was working or traveling or too busy for now. I worried what would happen if they knew she was just gone. One evening after the house was finally quiet, I pulled down the old photo albums. I sat at the kitchen table sifting through images, a smiling Heather at Caleb's 3rd birthday, a picnic at Goodale Park, the kids riding a carousel at the state fair. My own face appeared in the background, sometimes blurred, always tired. I realized then I was becoming the memory keeper. I was the one who held together the strands of our family even as the past receded and the present claimed us. The holidays were hardest. Thanksgiving meant a store-bought turkey and homemade stuffing. Christmas, I strung up colored lights from the attic, found treasures at thrift shops, wrapped each gift with care. I always sent Heather a card just in case she checked her old address. She never replied. The children built new routines. Sophie learned to braid Josie's hair. Caleb became the fixer mending loose doorknobs and squeaky hinges with a seriousness beyond his years. Eli brought home a clay heart he made in art class, pressing it into my palm with a shy smile. "It's for you, Mom," he whispered. That word, so small, nearly undid me. Every so often I'd lie awake heart racing, sure that Heather would appear at the door demanding her children back. I lived in fear of losing them not just to Heather, but to a system that saw only paperwork and not the life we had built. I filed taxes with every dependent listed. I kept records of doctor visits, parent-teacher conferences, even the family photos from birthdays and holidays, proof in case anyone asked. But the world moved on. Neighbors grew used to our mismatched clan. The kids thrived at school, bringing home certificates for perfect attendance, spelling bees, and science fairs. They stopped asking for Heather. Slowly, quietly, we became a family. No asterisks, no apologies. Sometimes, in the stillness of night, I wondered if I was enough, if my love could make up for what they'd lost. But every morning, when Eli wrapped his arms around my neck or when Sophie slipped her hand in mine, I found my answer. I was not the mother they expected. I was not the mother the world recognized. But I was the only one who stayed. On Josie's 6th birthday, I snapped a photo of the 5 of us around the kitchen table, the worn linoleum shining in the late afternoon Sunday. The kids were laughing, frosting smeared on their cheeks, eyes bright. I printed it and taped it to the fridge right next to their school schedules and my hospital badge. And I realized maybe, just maybe, I was the home they'd been waiting for all along. Columbus, Ohio, 2017 to 2019. By then, I was past 50, though. The kids, my kids, for all practical purposes, kept me moving as if I were much younger. The days had grown more settled. Our routines had stitched themselves into the fabric of daily life, school runs, after-school snacks, doctor's visits, late-night study sessions, and weekend chores. The rhythm was sometimes relentless, but it gave us something I never thought we'd have again: stability. I'd become Mom in every way, but one, the law still saw me as Aunt Linda. But to the children, there was no distinction. They called me Mom at home, at school, at every soccer game and science fair. At first, it startled me. I would look up from the bleachers when a teacher called for Caleb's mom, only to realize they meant me. It wasn't a title I'd claimed, but one that quietly grew into my skin, filling all the places Heather had left empty. Our house on Maple Grove Avenue became a sanctuary. The kitchen table was rarely clear, always littered with homework art projects and the remains of hastily prepared meals. Sophie learned to bake banana bread from scratch flour, dusting her cheeks as she measured, stirred, and laughed. Josie painted murals on scrap cardboard, filling the fridge with a rotating gallery of family portraits and rainbows. Eli, once shy, blossomed into the class clown, forever inventing games for the backyard or hiding under Marcia's piano to jump out and startle us all. Caleb grew taller than me in what felt like a single summer. He became the family protector, always ready to carry in groceries or walk the girls home from the bus stop. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom one Saturday morning, proudly showing off the new washer he'd bought with his own lawn mowing money. Birthdays, once a painful reminder of who was missing, slowly became celebrations of who remained. On Sophie's 12th birthday, we made cupcakes in the shape of roses. The kids arranged a surprise Mother's Day breakfast, complete with a card that read, "To the best mom who chose us every single day, I kept that card in my wallet, worn soft at the edges from too much handling. Marcia was always there, steady and supportive. She hosted Sunday dinners, gave advice about teenage moods, and reminded me that no one raises a family alone. When Linda's work schedule became overwhelming, Marcia filled in the gaps, picking up Josie from piano practice, taking Eli to the dentist, or just sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and a sympathetic ear. Despite all our efforts, the legal side never caught up. Every few months, I would gather my folders full of immunization records, report cards, evidence of our shared life, and drive downtown to the county office. Each time, a different clerk would scan my documents, shake their head, and say, "Without parental consent or court order, there's not much we can do." I stopped expecting miracles. Instead, I documented everything. Each school award, every medical bill, every letter home was carefully filed. If anyone ever questioned my right to these children, I wanted an answer for every possible doubt. Money was still tight, but we managed. I took on extra shifts at the hospital, covering nights and weekends whenever possible. The kids pitched in without complaint. Caleb learned to budget for groceries. Sophie watched her siblings after school. Josie ran laundry loads. Eli tidied the living room and checked under beds for stray socks. We were a team sometimes more out of necessity than choice, but always with a sense of togetherness that filled the house with warmth. The neighborhood came to know us as the Barretts. I was the nurse with the 4 kids, and though there were whispers at first wondering why 4 siblings had only their aunt to care for them, eventually people accepted our new normal. Neighbors dropped off winter coats, snow boots, and during the holidays, boxes of canned goods and home-baked cookies. One December, we woke up to find a Christmas tree left on our porch, decorated with hand-knit ornaments and a note, "You're not alone. Happy holidays from your friends on Maple Grove Avenue." We built our own traditions. Movie nights on Fridays, pancakes every Sunday, board games sprawled across the living room floor. On warm evenings, we'd gather on the porch steps, listening to the cicadas and telling stories about when the kids were younger, or for Eli and Josie's stories of how they came to live with me, minus the pain and confusion that surrounded their early days. The children rarely mentioned Heather anymore. When her name did surface, usually from an old photograph or a forgotten holiday card, it was with a mix of longing and resignation. Josie once asked if she could write a letter to her mom. I helped her compose the words, mailed it to Heather's last known address, and as always, waited. No reply ever came. Still, Heather's absence loomed in the quiet spaces. On the night before Caleb's 8th grade graduation, I found him sitting on the porch, knees drawn to his chest. "Do you think she even remembers us?" he asked, voice brittle with hurt. I sat beside him, the wooden steps creaking beneath our combined weight. "I think she remembers," I said honestly, "but sometimes people run from things they're not ready to face. That's not your fault." He nodded, eyes shining. We watched the fireflies drift across the lawn, and for a little while, neither of us needed to say anything more. I tried to shield the kids from the hardest truths. I never spoke badly about Heather, though I ached with anger some nights wondering how she could let so much time slip away. But my job was to keep us together, not to keep score. I chose love, and that choice became the foundation of our family. Josie once drew a picture of our house, coloring it bright yellow with 5 stick figures holding hands out front. Above the roof, she wrote, "Home is where Mom is." She hung it on the fridge, and every time I opened the door, I saw it and remembered what mattered most. Life wasn't perfect. There were arguments, slammed doors, tears over missed field trips, and last-minute science projects. The kids struggled with homework, friendships, and all the normal messes of growing up. There were nights I worried about making rent, or wondered if the brakes on my aging car would last another winter. But every setback was met with the same determination we'd find a way together. Over time, the sharp ache of abandonment dulled. We found joy in small things, a snowball fight in the front yard, a hot cup of cocoa after shoveling the driveway, laughter echoing through the house during game night. We celebrated every milestone, no matter how small: Caleb's first job mowing lawns, Sophie's blue ribbon at the county fair, Eli learning to ride his bike without training wheels. Every achievement, every hug, every ordinary moment became a thread in the tapestry of our new family. On my 52nd birthday, the kids pooled their allowance, and Marcia helped them bake a cake from scratch. After the candles were blown out, Sophie handed me a card they'd all signed. "Thank you for being our mom, even when you didn't have to be." I pressed it to my heart, overwhelmed with gratitude and love. That night, as I tucked each child into bed, I whispered the same promise I'd made since the day Heather left. No matter what happens, I'm not going anywhere. Sometimes when the house was quiet and the weight of the day pressed heavy on my shoulders, I would allow myself to hope. Hope that Heather was safe, hope that one day the legal system would recognize the family we had built, hope that the kids would remember not what they lost, but what we made together. As I closed my eyes at the end of those long days, the last thing I always heard was Eli's small voice from the hallway, "Good night, Mom, love you." And that more than anything was proof enough that we had become a real family. 2020 arrived in Columbus, Ohio with more gray mornings than sun, but in our house on Maple Grove Avenue, things felt as steady as they ever had. I had just turned 53. The kids, Caleb now a lanky 14, Sophie a thoughtful 12, Josie all curiosity at 10, Eli a tornado of energy at 8, were thriving in their routines. I worked extra shifts, Marcia helped whenever needed, and our days blurred together in the best possible way, ordinary, safe, predictable. Then, one chilly afternoon in early March, I found a letter waiting in the mailbox. The envelope was unfamiliar, no return, address only my name and our street written in looping, almost familiar handwriting. For a long moment, I stood frozen heart thumping before peeling it open at the kitchen table. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I recognized Heather's script immediately. "Linda, I know it's been too long. I've been trying to get things together. I want to see the kids maybe this summer if things go well. I hope you're all okay. Please tell them I love them. Heather." Her words were as thin as the paper, as tentative as a voice calling across a frozen pond. She didn't mention where she was, what she'd been doing, or why she'd disappeared for so many years. There was no apology, no explanation, just a handful of vague promises and the same signature she'd left on that crumpled note all those years ago. I read it 3 times, unsure whether to feel relief, anger, or dread. My hands trembled. I remembered every night the kids had asked for their mother, every story I'd spun to soften the truth. Now, after all the silent years, she wanted to step back in. That evening after dinner, I sat down with Marcia at the kitchen table, sliding the letter across to her. She read it, lips pursed, then looked up. "Are you going to tell the kids?" I shook my head. "Not yet. There's no sense getting their hopes up." Marcia understood. She urged me to keep the letter, to scan it, and add it to the growing stack of documents I'd been collecting. "You never know what's coming, Lynn. You need every piece of proof if things get complicated." So I did. I scanned the letter, labeled the file, and stored the original in my battered accordion folder. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by Eli's bed, watching the rise and fall of his breathing, and wondered what would happen if Heather really returned. The next morning, the kids were their usual selves. Caleb left for school early, headphones on, already taller than his classmates. Sophie worked on a science project at the kitchen table, careful and methodical, just like always. Josie practiced scales on Marcia's piano, her fingers nimble. Eli begged for pancakes, making faces until I relented and made a batch from scratch. I watched them trying to imagine how they'd react if Heather showed up again. Would they even remember her face? Would they want her to stay, or would they hide behind me, uncertain, angry, or afraid? Days passed, and I kept the letter to myself. I made a few phone calls to the county office, quietly inquiring about my options. The answer was the same. If the biological parent returns, you'll need to be ready to prove the children's best interest. Keep documentation, keep records, prepare statements from teachers, neighbors, anything that shows you're the stable guardian. So I doubled down. Every school achievement, Sophie's ribbon from the county fair, Caleb's report card, Josie's music recital program, was carefully filed. I asked the kids' teachers for written notes on their progress and character. I made extra copies of their immunization records, school forms, and every receipt that proved I'd supported them. The battered folder grew thicker by the month. Still, I didn't breathe a word to the kids. When Josie asked if she could invite a friend for a sleepover, I said yes, grateful for her growing confidence. When Eli brought home a Mother's Day card, purple crayons, scribbles, and crooked hearts, I taped it above the kitchen sink. Pride and fear tangled together in my chest. Heather's absence wasn't a wound anymore. It was a scar, something we'd learned to live with, even as it ached in the cold. But her letter had stirred up old anxieties. I lay awake imagining scenarios, Heather arriving at the front door, a stranger with a shared history, a courtroom, a judge, a decision I couldn't control. One evening, as I tucked Sophie into bed, she looked up at me with serious eyes. "If our mom ever comes back, will we have to go with her?" I hesitated, heart pounding. "No one can make you go anywhere you don't want to, sweetheart. We're a family. I'll always fight for you." She nodded, small hands clutching the blanket. "I want to stay here. After that, I made it my mission to make our home feel as secure as possible. I let the kids paint their rooms in colors they chose. Sophie picked pale blue, Josie bright yellow, Eli a wild orange. Caleb asked for plain white, but hung up his own sketches and photos of the family. We filled the house with laughter and small rituals. On Saturdays, we all piled into the car and drove to the park, feeding ducks and playing tag. Evenings were for movie marathons. Eli curled on my lap, popcorn spilled everywhere. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting, that Heather's shadow was creeping back into our lives, slow and inevitable. I guarded my folder like a talisman, checking and rechecking that every paper was in its place. As the year went on, the kids thrived. Caleb made the soccer team Sophie, aced her science final Josie and Eli, built a lemonade stand on the front lawn, earning enough for a pizza party with friends. Marcia celebrated every milestone with us, always ready, with a camera, a cake, or just a steady hand on my shoulder when I needed it. One evening in late fall, I stood at the window watching the leaves tumble down, wondering if Heather would ever return or if her promise would fade like all the rest. In the quiet, Eli hugged me around the waist. "I like our family just the way it is," he whispered. I kissed the top of his head, grateful for the peace we had built, wary of what might come. And as the first snow fell, covering Columbus in a blanket of white, I made myself one more promise. No matter who showed up at our door, I would do everything in my power to keep our family together. The spring of 2024 brought no gentle renewal to our house on Maple Grove Avenue. If anything, the world seemed harsher, as if it sensed what was coming. The letter from the courthouse arrived on a gray Tuesday. I opened it with shaking hands, reading and rereading the official summons. Heather Clayton, my sister, had filed suit for custody of her 4 children and for ownership of the only home any of us had left. It was as if the past 10 years had evaporated. Every day and night I'd spent raising those kids suddenly up for debate. In the days leading up to the hearing, our house was a swirl of anxiety and preparation. I pulled out my battered accordion folder lining the kitchen table with birth certificates, school records, report cards, medical files, and every letter Heather had ever written. I scanned everything twice, making copies for my lawyer, a young, earnest man who assured me that facts and devotion would matter more than DNA. The kids felt it too. Caleb, now towering over me at 18, quietly fixed things around the house as if preparing for a coming storm. Sophie grew withdrawn, her usual laughter muted as she helped Josie and Eli with homework and chores. Josie, now 14, asked if I would still love her, even if things changed. Eli, 12, clung to my side, watching my face for any sign of reassurance. Marcia stayed close, dropping by with casseroles and words of encouragement. The night before court, she sat with me on the porch, hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "You've done everything right, Lynn. The truth is on your side," she whispered. I nodded, but my heart rattled with fear. The morning of the hearing, I dressed the children as best I could, pressed shirts, borrowed ties, Sophie in her best dress. I wore my hospital badge on my lapel, a quiet reminder of who I was when the world wasn't watching. The Franklin County Courthouse was cold and echoing, full of unfamiliar faces. Heather stood near the front, flanked by attorney Greg Wilkins, a man with a practiced frown and a stack of legal pads. Heather's hair was perfectly styled, her nails immaculate, her face a mask of determination. She barely glanced at us. The judge, gray-haired and solemn, asked for opening statements. Heather's lawyer spoke first. "Your Honor, my client regrets the years apart from her children. She is here to reclaim her rightful place as their mother and to restore the family home, which is her inheritance." When it was my turn, I took a steadying breath. "Your Honor, I am not these children's mother by birth, but I have been their parent in every way that matters. I have the records to prove it, and I ask that their voices be heard as well." The judge nodded, inviting us to present evidence. My lawyer began with the envelope birth certificates, school awards, medical records, photos of science fairs, birthday parties, holidays, first days of school. Receipts for every birthday cake, every doctor's visit, every winter coat and soccer cleat. Letters from teachers and neighbors. Most important, the note Heather left on that rainy spring day, "I'll be back soon. Thanks, Linda." The courtroom was silent as the judge read through each document. I watched Heather's face. Her mask slipped just a little as the evidence piled up. When my lawyer finished, the judge turned to the kids. One by one, they were invited to speak. Caleb stood first, tall, steady, voice clear. "Linda is my family," he said. "She's the only parent I've ever really had." Sophie, trembling but resolute, said, "I want to stay with my mom, with Linda." Josie's words broke my heart. Heather left us. Linda is the reason we're safe and together. Eli, my baby, now 12, simply hugged my arm and whispered, "Please let us stay." Heather's lawyer pressed hard. He argued that blood ties should prevail, that Heather's absence was a mistake, not malice. Heather, in tears, claimed she had always intended to come back, that she'd been robbed of her children by circumstance. But the facts stood strong. Every document, every faded birthday photo, every certificate bore my name as the guardian who never left. The judge asked one final question. "Children, do you wish to return to your birth mother or stay with Linda Barrett?" All four answered in unison, "We want to stay." The silence was heavy. I gripped the arm of my chair, the battered envelope still clutched in my lap. The judge cleared his throat. "Based on the overwhelming evidence and the clear wishes of the children, legal custody is awarded to Linda Barrett. The home at Maple Grove Avenue will remain in her name." A sound escaped Heather's lips, a wounded, defeated cry. She turned away shoulders, shaking her lawyer's hand on her back. The kids reached for me. Caleb squeezed my hand. Sophie wept into my shoulder. Josie and Eli clung to my arms. For a long moment, I just held them overwhelmed by relief and sorrow both. Justice didn't look like a victory dance. It looked like quiet validation. It looked like surviving. As we walked out into the spring sunlight, I pressed the envelope to my heart. For the first time in a decade, I felt like we belonged truly, finally, and without question. Weeks slipped by after the courtroom doors closed behind us and life on Maple Grove Avenue gently found its new shape. Spring spilled sunshine into our kitchen each morning, dappling the battered table where so many hard conversations and small celebrations had unfolded. The air felt lighter, as if the old house itself breathed a sigh of relief. I finished the last round of paperwork at the county office signing forms that finally recognized me as the children's legal guardian. The clerk handed me a folder with official stamps and signatures, a simple transaction, but to me it was the end of a long and lonely road. For 10 years, I had waited for someone else to say what I already knew, that we were a family. At home, the children moved with a freedom I hadn't seen before. Caleb was accepted to a state university not far from Columbus, planning to study engineering and still making time to help Eli fix his bicycle in the driveway. Sophie dreamed of art school, painting sunflowers across her bedroom wall. Josie organized a bake sale to raise money for the animal shelter, while Eli saved his allowance to buy a set of sketchbooks, his newest passion. Marcia hosted a dinner for us, inviting a few close friends and neighbors. She raised a glass and said to Linda for never giving up, and to family however you find it. I blinked back tears, realizing how many people had helped us carry the weight all those years. Our house was full of laughter, noisy dinners, and new beginnings. The old photos on the fridge, faded birthdays, field trips, snowy mornings remained, but now there were new ones. Caleb in a graduation gown, Sophie with her first mural, Josie and Eli selling cookies on the sidewalk. We were a patchwork held together by shared struggle and stubborn love. I never heard from Heather again. Sometimes late at night, I would take out the box of letters and mementos, a scrapbook of old wounds and unfinished stories, and let myself remember just for a moment. Not with anger, but with a kind of gentle acceptance. Heather had vanished into her own silence, and that was her choice. Our story was not hers to finish. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Marcia, a cup of tea in hand, watching the kids argue over which movie to watch. Sunlight caught on the family photo taped to the window, and I felt peace settle into the corners of my chest. Eli curled up next to me, sketchbook balanced on his knees. "We're really a family, aren't we?" he asked, eyes bright. I brushed a lock of hair from his forehead and smiled. "Yes, we are, always have been." Night came soft and slow. I tucked the kids in one by one, whispering the same promise: "You're safe, you're home." Standing in the hallway, I looked at the framed photos, the painted walls, the mismatched shoes by the door. Our family, our future. If I could do it all again, I would choose this every struggle, every heartbreak, every hard-won victory. Because love is not a contract or a court ruling. It is the quiet persistence of showing up day after day, no matter what. And in the end, that was enough. Looking back, I sometimes marvel at how far we came. There were nights when I doubted everything, when the bills piled up and loneliness crowded out hope, when I wondered if the world would ever see us as a real family. But every struggle was a thread in the fabric we wove together, 4 children who lost their mother, and an aunt who never stopped choosing them day after day. If this story means anything, it's that family isn't written in blood or ink. It's found in the small acts of devotion, the quiet sacrifices, the daily promises to keep showing up. We didn't become a family because the court said so. We became one the first night. I tucked those kids into bed and whispered, "You're safe. You're home." I wouldn't trade a single moment. Not the hard ones, not the sleepless nights, not even the heartbreak of loss. Because what we built on Maple Grove Avenue is ours, messy, beautiful, and real. Have you ever chosen love that wasn't handed to you? I'd love to hear your story. Let me know what family means to you in the comments. Thank you for listening and for believing that every quiet act of care can change the course of a life.